Hey traders, welcome to another weekly game plan for the FX commodity and crypto market, starting with the dollar. Just a quick reminder where we're sitting on the higher time frames. We are bouncing off of a potential region for a turn in the dollar market, the dollar bear market, back towards a longer term bull market, potential turn in trend, and then match that with what the rest of the market's seeing in terms of a lower time frame or a inverted head and shoulders from a classic charting point of view that's broken the neckline now. So it really looks to me like we're heading towards that dollar bull market, as we've been calling for basically from the beginning of the year. We headed out of this expanding flat into this lower time frame, running flat, and looks like we're going to start to accelerate to the upside from here. Still potential for a little bit of a push lower from here first, down towards kind of 92.3. Kind of a retest of that neckline, or second retest of that neckline before we see acceleration, but very much along the lines of dollar bull market this week and what we're looking for, especially since the FOMC is talking this week, and they may be looking to jawbone the dollar higher as a result of the kind of inflation that they're seeing. I still think we're going to see deflation, all those inflation figures start to move towards disinflation. That may be a catalyst, but you might find this is part of the policy era where the Fed is stepping into jawbone the current inflation that we're seeing. So the reflation trade not quite over, but we're starting to see that turn in the dollar bull market to the upside, very much in line with a big run to the upside. So tomorrow's strategy session, we'll be looking at trading this to the upside and where to get in. And we're seeing this across the board. Euro is the same thing, potentially a running triangle to the downside, or potentially one early pop to the upside first before we see downside. I'm seeing that pop along a lot of these charts. Pound US dollar, you're seeing that same corrective structure where we could see a little bit more upside before a turn to the downside. That's definitely on the cards. Aussie dollar, US dollar, same thing. US dollar CAD, same thing. But we'll get to that in tomorrow's strategy session, how we're going to look to trade that. So members, watch for tomorrow's session to be quite an important one in relation to how we're going to be taking on this week. US dollar yen is another one that we'll be looking for. It looks to me like a contracting flat has formed, and we should start to see this acceleration to the upside from here. Definitely on the cards, and definitely one you want to watch for. If you haven't watched the US dollar yen breakdown in part 7 of the course, you really want to watch that, because that's part of exactly where we're sitting right now. Silver looking really weak. Again, another one that looks like it may rally in the short term to kind of 26, maybe retest 26 and then accelerate to the downside. I've discarded all of this as part of the previous impulse. I'm looking at this as a bigger corrective structure. When we go into the higher time frames, I still think moving forward, and because of deflation, we're going to see silver kind of sub 4. That's definitely on the cards. Go into single digits, definitely below 11. So watch for that to break out. I think what we saw here was a wave failure to the upside, and now we're starting to accelerate to the downside. But again, we'll cover that in tomorrow's trading strategy. Gold should be holding up here a little bit better. I think we're going into correction, a longer term correction for gold in this region, or corrective structure, before we see real downside. And that's all part of what we call the gold-silver ratio. When you see inflation, you see silver outperforming gold, just because of the dynamics, especially copper outperforming gold. That makes more sense. Copper outperforming gold, in which case you'll see gold kind of silver outperforming gold to the upside. Now to the downside, when that ratio turns back towards deflation, which I think we're beginning to see the first signs of, you will see gold kind of holding up, still falling, but holding up against silver. And that's exactly what we're seeing here, where you can see silver looking ready to really rally to the downside, where gold looks like it's going into a corrective structure before you see a rally to the downside. So watch for that. Euro Swiss coming out of the dollar. We're looking into Euro Swiss as a potential turn to the upside out of this corrective structure, impulse ABC, and then an impulse to the upside. So we'll be watching for a turn here. That should be later in the week in terms of corrective structure. So that'll be part of a later in the week trading strategy. But right now, there's not much there unless you're looking for a really high risk corrective structure entry, or high risk entry in terms of kind of a falling wedge. Not really on the cards as a falling wedge. I don't really love that, but it is possible for high risk entry. But I'm much more keen to wait for a corrective structure to develop. So we'll be watching for that on the lower time frames. Euro pound. I really think we want to take some trades here in terms of looking for a flag to trade to the downside, because it's very possible that what we saw here is actually this move to the downside, where you have a bit of a contracting flat. It's very possible. If it is a contracting flat, it should accelerate quite strongly to the downside out of this structure. But it's also very possible that all of this structure was actually just part of the B wave, and we're going to get this move to the downside now, down into this region, and then a push to the upside, and then all of that is going to be part of this bigger corrective structure before we see the move to the downside. But I still want to take this short on a lower time frame or on a lower risk position, just in case this is actually part of a contracting flat and we're going to accelerate down towards 82. So watch for that, and we'll cover that again tomorrow. Pound Swiss, I think another one that should accelerate to the downside. Structurally speaking, you should be in this already because of that move to the downside out of this ABC. But it's also possible that what we saw here was a impulse ABC correction, touched on the 0.618, and we may accelerate to the upside. So that's another one we're going to cover in tomorrow's trading strategy, just to kind of manage this trade that we have going to the downside. We did have a short entry order below these lows, so we'll be looking to manage this trade in the most effective manner. So watch for that in tomorrow's trading strategy. Pound yen, I think, is kind of green shoot for potential move to the downside, but it's also kind of has potential to be part of another leg higher. But we'll be trading that or covering that in more depth tomorrow in tomorrow's session. Aussie dollar yen, another one we'll be covering. I actually don't want to cover that. And New Zealand dollar yen, we'll be covering that tomorrow in more depth. CAD yen is a good green shoot for a potential trade to the downside, where this is potentially part of an A, B, C, D, E. You can see how the structure is starting to develop a bit of a potentially triangle or running triangle structure, very much along the same lines as the Swiss yen, which we covered in the lessons. You can go and look at in part 7, very, very in-depth. We're waiting to see how we can define the structure as something corrective to really look for those longer-term short trades. As you know, on the higher time frames, the corrective structure is very clean. Impulse ABC. We touched on that 1-to-1 level, and now we're looking for an acceleration to the downside. And it's a very, very big trade to the downside. So that's why we're very, very keen to look for shorts and not too much in terms of looking for longs in these yen trades. Like I said, CAD yen, Swiss yen, Aussie yen, New Zealand dollar yen. We're looking for the correct short entry. So be watching for this to play out. And then Swiss yen is the cleanest one we have. What I really believe is going to happen here is an impulse to the downside. All of this A, B, C, D, E, if you look at the nature of these waves, it's very representative of an expanding triangle, where you can see an C of B to the downside to break these lows at 118, then a rally to give you your C wave, and all of that's your ABC, and then a move to the downside. But also possible that you had this A wave, this is an A, B, C, D, E expanding triangle, and now we're part of this move to the downside. So we'll be covering this in tomorrow's trading strategy as well, to really clarify how we want to best take advantage of what's happening in here. But again, when we zoom out, you can just see how it's a structure that's ready to go to the downside. Impulse A, B, C, and then big impulse to the downside. So it's a longer term trade, definitely a longer term trend that we're looking to get into here. Very, very good trade, with potentially very, very big returns. We don't want to miss out on that. UKOIL, but tricky here. If we go into the dailies, the structure is very overextended in this region because you have this impulse, ABC, nice big corrective structure, and then another impulse to the upside. We're touching on the 1414, given that structure. At the same time, we have this lower time frame running flat that's potentially formed here. So in terms of structure, you might have this as an impulse, ABC, impulse to the upside. If we look at the length, you can see that it's done enough, and we might see kind of $100 oil here. So I'm quite bullish oil fundamentally speaking, so I'm very keen to actually get into this long, even though it is overextended on the higher time frames. So watch for this to give us a little bit of an entry here this week. Definitely want to look for that long oil trade, and we'll be covering this again in tomorrow's trading strategy. So tomorrow's trading strategy, very, very important in terms of looking for those longs and where we look to get into those longs. Might actually only cover this later in the week, but we'll see. US dollars are, you definitely want to be long. You should be long, or could be long 2 positions here because of the structure and because of how we've been trading this. We traded this as a triangle at first, developed into a running flat. We decided to add to the position above those highs, which got taken in very late on in Friday, and this should start accelerating to the upside. I really, really like this trade. When we zoom out to the weeklies, you can see how you have this big ABC running flat, and we should see at the very least 19 to the dollar, 19 Rand to the dollar moving forward. So emerging markets should really start to take a hit here, and I really think that has to do with tapering talks, jawboning by the Fed in terms of US dollar, or in terms of dollar strength, in terms of interest rates and inflation, and that's really going to push emerging markets to new highs. So I think that cycle is now ended, and the dollar bull market is really starting to begin. Bitcoin, kind of a mixed bag, but I really think this rally that we're seeing here is a bit of a bull trap. I think a lot of people are going to see this as a breakout out of this descending wedge with MACD divergence, and as part of the new bull market. But I'm more inclined to think what we're seeing here is actually a ABC central B wave structure. We'll get this move to the downside to complete your B wave, then we'll get another rally to the upside, and then a complete move to the downside down towards kind of 15, 16 to the downside. Something along those lines. We'll be watching that, and when you zoom out, you can see how all of that is just a break and retest of this really big head and shoulders structure. Break and retest of the neckline, which is about 30,000 USD. So that's a very, very key level. I'll be very cautious about trading this descending wedge breakout to the upside. And why I think that is, if you go to some of the altcoins, they are much cleaner structures in terms of impulse, ABC corrective structures to the downside, where you can see how you have an impulse off the highs. You have this A, B, C that has potential to develop, and then you have an impulse to the downside to come. So and rather than looking to get long here, I'm looking to trim any remaining crypto positions I have. And then if I really want to hedge that bet, I'll put an entry order above the highs, like 45,000 Bitcoin long trade, because if that is a descending wedge, then that means this corrective structure is complete, and this should accelerate up towards 100K. So I'm happy either way. But it's a very, very, very dangerous region here, getting sucked into trades here, and then you see this breakdown towards kind of 17 or 15. I think the weekly 200-week moving average is where we headed, and that's around about 17,000. So watch for that. So as you can see, very crypto bullish, bearish, very dollar bullish. So in this tomorrow's game plan, we'll be covering those dollar trades. We'll be covering how to trade this week's dollar moves, and how to trade that oil trade, and some of these yen shorts, some very key trades up for grabs this week. We'll be covering those in this week's trading strategies. So if you're not a member yet, definitely a week you want to get in. It'll probably pay for your membership. And if you are a member, we will see you in the trading room tomorrow morning before the European session begins. So we'll see you then. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.